Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to be talking about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And why? Well, because in doing the research for my last video, which was about meta-modernism, I ran across an interview with the three directors of this movie. And no, I don't think it's the interview that most people have posted on their social media talking about the fans. This seems to be a separate interview done by Marvel.com, and it is audio only. And I will put a link for it in the description. But within this interview, these directors talk about presenting Miles Morales as a new type of hero. And since my channel is all about the traditional idea of hero, well, of course, I'm going to do a video on it. But before that, if anyone wants a true traditional hero story, there are 3 links in the description and in the pinned comment. They are for my 3 graphic novels. The first 2 are superhero graphic novels with traditional heroes, certainly. The first link is for my published graphic novel, Thomas Valiant. The second is for the open campaign for my second graphic novel, The Valiant Heroes, which will be publishing the end of summer, early fall this year. And the third is for my upcoming graphic novel campaign for CROM the Destroyer, a return to form for low fantasy. CROM the Destroyer will be opening on the last day of June so that it can be open for the 4th of July long weekend. I am taking the mythological figures that Robert E. Howard used to create his characters, especially Conan, and then recreating a similar type of character, which is much more a combination of Kull Conan and Solomon Kane. And if you click the link and go over and sign up on the early bird page, you will receive a reminder email when the project goes live and get a free exclusive pinup poster with your order. And just to let you know, there's also going to be published a separate print story from CROM the Destroyer in the upcoming ANVIL Iron Age Magazine #2. And I'll put a link in the description for Iron Age Magazine #1. So if you want manly stories, if you want traditional hero stories, click on those links in the description and go on over and see if my graphic novels are for you. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Now, right up front, I'll let you know, this is not in any way a movie review. I'm not even going to talk about the movie as an analysis of it as a piece of entertainment. I'm going to talk about this movie as an analysis of it as a piece of media and how that factors into this new idea of hero that these directors are trying to incorporate as part of the central theme of the movie itself. And as usual, I do that by looking not only at the movie and what happens within it, but also at why the movie exists, how it exists, what the creators of this movie actually intended to do, etc., etc. So let's start with the big picture. And the big picture is a push for Miles Morales to become a more central figure within the Marvel heroes. Now, this isn't anything new. Over at Marvel Entertainment and Marvel Comics, they've been trying to re-establish these new heroes as the central figures for their entire line, whether it be within the comics or within other types of media, for quite some time now. They tried to make Captain Marvel the flagship character for Marvel, but that failed severely. They kept on having to reboot the title and still have to reboot the title every couple of years. They tried to put her into the major Hollywood blockbuster movies by sandwiching this movie of hers in between the 2 movies that everybody just wanted to see, and still, this character does not catch. So, transferring the mantle over to her as the flagship character did not seem to work. And so they moved on to try to do a similar thing with Miss Marvel. And I covered this on my channel a couple of years ago. There was a thing which I refer to as the Marvel Rising Initiative. The central character for that was Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan. They started to use the Kamala Khan Miss Marvel symbol, which is sort of like a lightning bolt, as the de facto symbol for Marvel on most of their website and podcasts and things like that. They, of course, have made a show for this character, and she will be appearing within one of the movies fairly soon. But again, this character is a failed character that never catches. However, if the people over at Marvel, and at Disney really, are good at anything, they're supremely good at being rats that jump from sinking ship to sinking ship. And so, they have now jumped over from those 2 characters I mentioned to Miles Morales. Miles Morales, again, was a failing character within the comics. They kept on trying to make him Spider-Man, and then they had to go back and say, no, this is Miles Morales Spider-Man because people don't want to give up Peter Parker as Spider-Man. However, he did gain some traction within the video games that they put him in, and that led into making a movie that was centered around this character, which would be the first part of this trilogy, which is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And although that movie didn't do very well as compared with other Marvel movies, and yes, I know it's a Sony movie instead of directly being a Marvel movie, it did well enough for Marvel Comics to start pushing this character more and more, and we just went through about a year of them trying to make every central character within the Marvel Comics Miles Morales in this sort of what-if context, as what if Miles Morales was Thor? What if Miles Morales was the Hulk? Etc., etc. Now, these books were soundly ridiculed by people who have any kind of knowledge of good comics, but again, they pushed forward within this second movie because they knew it was going to be a trilogy to begin with, the second movie being Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and it has done fairly well. I think it is the second biggest opening box office for an animated movie. So, you're going to see a lot more of this jumping on to let's make Miles Morales the head of the Marvel Universe. And of course, retire Peter Parker. And of course, make sure that Spider-Gwen is attached to his star. So that's a little bit about the character and what is going on behind that. Now let's look at the type of movie this movie is. Now, as I said in my last video, this is an example par excellence of this new type of quote-unquote progressive media called meta-modernism. Now, if you want to hear a much more deep conversation about meta-modernism and where it comes from, go and listen to my video from last week. I will link that in the description, and it will be linked at the end of this video as well. So, what is meta-modernism very briefly, and where does it come from? Well, traditionally, for thousands of years in Western civilization, mankind was seen as existing as a composite whole of physical reality, spiritual reality, and abstract thought. But modernism came in and culturally really took over somewhere between the 1920s and the 1960s and said, no, we're going to concentrate on just the physical reality of human existence and jettison this whole idea of A, spirituality, and B, abstract thought. And so culturally, you get a lot of these stories that are based only on the physical. Of course, ignoring the fact that if you get rid of those other two parts of human existence, you can then no longer trace value back to anything. But again, they just push that to the side until we get into postmodernism, which really began in the 1960s, late 1950s, and has gone on right up until today. And with postmodernism, it's a recognition of that fact I just talked about. They recognize that, if you get rid of all of these other things besides the physical, there's no real meaning to anything. And they didn't say, well, let's go back to meaning. They said, well, let's embrace the nihilism that points to. And that's why you get entertainment that is based upon deconstruction, where you take things like Heroes or story itself and deconstruct it to show the audience that, all these things that you thought had meaning when you were a modernist thinking person, well, neither the parts of that nor the whole have any real meaning because there's no connection to anything greater. Therefore, all you got is nihilism. And that's what the deconstruction of postmodernism was. And still is to some extent. But now we've moved on to meta-modernism. And just one caveat before I get there. This is what I was talking about over the last couple of years on my channel. Every once in a while, I would mention the fact that once the quote-unquote progressive people start to lose control, they're going to steep themselves in nostalgia. This is, in some sense, a retreat point for them to gather their strength. Now, I didn't foresee it happening in this way exactly, but this is what meta-modernism is. First of all, it's the cultural storytelling that embodies the idea and acknowledgement that from postmodernism, yes, we know there is absolutely zero meaning to anything, but within meta-modernism will give you the illusion that you can cling to some kind of self-made, self-referential meaning that, again, you construct for yourself. Now, as I talked about last week, part of doing this is these multiverse, metaverse kinds of stories where they try to crack into the idea that all choices are open to you because of the multiverse, although no choices are open to you because of nihilism. Again, to present that illusion that you have some kind of choice. But some of the smaller ways that they do this is to take what comic readers have seen for at least the last 10 years and use those techniques. And those would be, first of all, LOL, so random humor. Secondly, breaking the fourth wall. And thirdly, nostalgia bait. And so we get all of that I just talked about from metamodernism in this movie, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And it is that nostalgia bait that I want to concentrate on for a moment here. You see, what they're doing is they're nudge, nudge, wink, winking at the audience saying, first of all, we know that there is no meaning to anything, and we know that you know that there is no meaning to anything, and we know that you know that we know that there is no meaning to anything. Around in a circle it goes. And as the creators of this piece of media, we even know that storytelling itself has no meaning. So what are we going to do for you? Well, we're going to present a spectacle to you, which in itself is an illusion. And a great part of that illusion is to use nostalgia, to say, hey, you remember all these things that were once cool and that people in society really liked? Well, it really wasn't society, it was more the comic society at that time. But they sort of blur the lines on that, and they'll say, you know, all of these things that were once cool or have been cool over the last 10 years, like memes, well, we're going to stick all of that into this one product so that you can feel that nostalgia and that connection in some way. So all of those older ideas that used to be cool can be brought forward into now this thing is cool. And from that societal acceptance of this thing being cool, you can gain a momentary, and that's all it is, a momentary grasp on some kind of meaning for your life generated from societal acceptance. This is why you get these annoying, virtue-signaling, attention-seeking people saying, hey, look, I'm into the new thing. So that's the context of how the movie exists, as a piece of this new cultural metamodernism, which is a new extension of how the quote-unquote progressive ideology is going to express itself within culture. Now let's move on very briefly to the three directors for this movie. I found it very funny that when I went to this podcast and then I went back to look for the names of these three directors, Marvel.com never gives the names of these three guys. It just says the three directors of, as if they were three parts of some amorphous mass. And quite honestly, I'm going to do the same. Why? Well, in part, again, because this is a audio broadcast only, and it is extremely difficult to keep track of who exactly is speaking within the questions for these three directors of this movie. But all of them, just to let you know, are right on board with the quote-unquote progressive train and the push to insert progressive ideas into storytelling. One of them actually wrote for Star Trek Discovery and has multiple awards from the NAACP. So I'm not going to go too far into the background for each of these people because that would bog this video down way too much. So let's move on very briefly to some of the things that these directors have specifically put into this movie. And when discussing that, we have to always remember that this is a computer-generated movie, and as such, it is both expensive and difficult to render what you see on the screen at every point, from every angle, with everything. You can't look at the background and say, well, it's just the background. They didn't mean to do that. No, everything in this movie, whether it be in the foreground or the background or something very small, was very specifically, painstakingly, expensively, pixel by pixel, put into this movie. Number one, there is a sort of inspirational speech that is given by Miles Morales' mother to him at one point. And there's some very interesting dialogue there. She says, you're not my little boy anymore, basically. You're going off to be by yourself. I'm no longer there to protect you. I just want to make sure that you know that you can stand up and make sure everyone accepts that there is, as she says, no place that you don't belong. And to get rid of the double negative there and to translate what that means, it's basically the quote-unquote progressive notion, a very abstract notion. Notice it never gives any real specifics, but notion that people can go wherever they want, that people should have no bars to where they can go and what they can do. Now, more specifically, it promotes the notion that the quote-unquote progressive ideology controls all spaces, and there's no place that they can't control. Because really, it's an absurd notion that there is no place barred to you, There are plenty of places barred to plenty of people for plenty of things, and that's the way it should be. In a healthy society, you can't just walk behind a store counter and start doing whatever it is you want to do. But within a quote-unquote progressive society, you can walk into a store and just take whatever you want. In a normal, healthy society, you can't get people, let's say protesters, walking into any place that they want to go and disrupting what is going on. I'm sorry, there are rules and there are places that you don't belong. And in a healthy, well-working society, we all know that there are borders that we must adhere to. Not anybody can traipse across a border and say, yeah, I belong here now. That's not how things actually work. But within a quote-unquote progressive society, this is the mindset, that there is no place that you cannot go because there's no place that you do not belong. Again, the confusing circular and double negative language is used by the quote-unquote progressive people in order for you to chase your tail so that you don't think about this too deeply before they move on to the next thing. And I'm sure someone might be saying to themselves, well, it seems like this is a whole lot of your opinion. No, actually, it's me understanding the way that progressive arguments actually proceed. As I have stated a number of times on my channel, a progressive argument does not, as a rational argument does, present you the thesis at the beginning. No, what it does is it takes you down a winding, emotional path wherein you agree with turning point after turning point until it gets to the end, which is the emotional culmination of the entire emotional manipulation of the past few minutes, so that when they present to you their actual point at the very end, which is a heavy part of progressivism, you're just used to so much nodding in agreement with what they have to say that you nod in agreement with this last point as well. And this is the exact way that this little speech of Miles Morales' mother is constructed. And the end point is, there is no place that should be barred to you. There is no place that you do not belong. Which, once again, is a progressive fantasy. Now let's move on to a few other points that other people are indeed picking out of this movie. But before I get into those, I have to stress the point that this is a computer-generated animated movie. Nothing in this movie is there by chance. So, with that in mind, when you see several times over the course of the movie a small BLM sticker or something of the kind, you know that it's meant to be there for a very specific reason. And on top of that, when you follow Gwen Stacy on her story, there is, in her room, an alphabet people flag of the baby blue, pink, and white kind, which is for the T part of the alphabet people, and it is written over top of that that these kinds of people, their lives matter. And if you add to that the fact that you can also find this flag on her father's arm, who's a policeman, and he puts it above his other insignia, once again, realizing that nothing is here by chance, everything was put in there, computer generated specifically for a reason, you understand how much these people who are making the movie are pressing quote-unquote progressive points. Now, further from that, there was someone on Twitter who put forth the idea that since these things are there, and you look at the part of the story which is specifically about Gwen Stacy, and you see that it is shot in hues of pink, light blue, and white, this person on Twitter claimed that this makes Gwen Stacy part of the T in the alphabet people. Now, this person was soundly mocked for this interpretation of things, and I do believe that this is a ridiculous idea, and it probably comes from a ridiculous person, but at the same time, I think they're absolutely right. This is Marvel, once again, have to remember, nothing is here by chance. That lighting is not there by chance. This is Marvel prepping everyone for the fact that they're going to take this character and make them into such an alphabet person. I would lay money on this. And again, why would I do such a thing? Why? Because this is what they've been doing exactly within the comics for, at the very least, the last 10 years. I've made probably half a dozen videos already at this point talking about the shift in comics from the 1980s and early 1990s primary color palette to this feminized color palette that you see today. And this is done, first of all, for a very specific reason. And there's a difference. Why? Because the cellular structure of men's eyes actually filter out most colors. They can see basically primary colors in order for them to better see shapes and movement. Whereas the cellular construction of women's eyes is exactly the opposite. They can't see shapes and movement as well as men. Why? Because they see many more colors. And so the shift from this primary color palette of the original great comics into what I see right now as mud, and I would say most guys see this as a mud color palette because everything blends together because we can't see the gradation between these colors. This is a movement towards a feminine color palette, quite specifically, and as someone like Kelly Sue DeConnick has gone on about, she would be the creator of the current iteration of Captain Marvel, she says that this is to show you that comics are for women right now. And not only that, but at the same time that the female way to interpret things is the correct way to do so, because she's been on record stating that, so what? If men can't interact with these stories as well as women, so what? The female way is the way to do it. This is part of the feminist ideological tint, which is a part of progressivism, which is to say that women and the way that females do things are the correct way. This is baked right into feminism, and again comes up so many times on the podcasts for Marvel, the idea that there is two different kinds of power. One that you just call power, which is masculine and always destructive, and two, the feminine one, which you name empowerment, which is always creative. So you take all of that and you superimpose a very specific feminine color palette onto some comics, which is to say light blue, pink, and white. It is a visual support system for the progressive talking points that are being presented within said stories. The last one that I can remember off the top of my head, because I haven't read a whole lot of current comics for a little bit now, probably a year or more, was a G.I. Joe comic. And again, if they're going to do this to a G.I. Joe comic, what do you think they're going to do to a heavy, progressive story about two teenagers? So yeah, this person on Twitter, they're absolutely right. They're crazy, but they're right. This is what Marvel's doing. They're going to, I would lay money on it, announce probably sometime next to the next movie coming out that, guess what? Gwen Stacy is T in the alphabet people, which will allow the progressives to get online and say, oh, guess what? All you young boys who thought that you had a crush on Gwen Stacy at one point, guess what? You're part of the alphabet community because you have a crush on someone who is this. Mark my words, it's going to happen. So let's take all of that as a backdrop to the words of the directors as they talk about this new type of hero. In this interview, they talk about Miles Morales as being the exemplar, the embodiment of this new type of hero, the first one of this new type of hero. But their argument is a two-part argument. The first part of their argument, I can't quite disprove. It's not something that I can do from here. They could be correct. I certainly don't think they are, and I'll give you my reasons why, but they could be. And the first part of their argument is that young people, especially over the last 10 years, and by the way, they're using their children, the boys, and their nephews, the boys, as examples for this. They're saying that those young people that they talk to, they all see that Miles Morales is actually Spider-Man. So in their minds, for younger people who have grown up in the last 10 to 15 years and are young now, when you say Spider-Man, they don't think Peter Parker, they automatically think Miles Morales. Now, I can't disprove that as being true or false, but I can give you my reasons for why I think what they're saying is not true. It's because they're using people from their own families in order to judge this. And I want to bring in an example of something that was said on an interview by the second-in-command at Marvel Comics for over 10 years. She was the vice president of content and character development, and she has since moved on to be a producer with Marvel Entertainment. She was at one point helping produce the animated shows and movies for Marvel, which included Marvel Rising and Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And in an interview, she was saying that if parents of young boys were looking at their boys and the boys were saying to themselves or to their parents, I don't want to watch this. This is a girl show. Her advice to those parents, and by the way, her advice as someone who does not have children, was that the parents should take those boys and purposefully sit them down in front of these kinds of shows and teach them to like girl things. Once again, there's that notion of the girl way to do things is the correct way to do things. The boy way to do things is the wrong way. But my point being is that if this is how the progressive mind works, that you have to take your children and sit them down in front of this type of entertainment and teach them specifically what to think and how to think in this progressive way, what do you think the children and the extended family of these three men who are heavy progressives is going to be like? Well, I would argue that it's probable that these people have sat their own children and nephews down and said from the very earliest times that they could get something into their brain that Miles Morales is the real Spider-Man. And therefore, when they ask them this question several years later, who is Spider-Man, they just regurgitate that it's Miles Morales. But really, the point why they're saying this is that in their minds, Miles Morales is now Spider-Man, and he is now the flagship character for Marvel, because really, Spider-Man is the de facto flagship character for Marvel, and that as such, he should be interacted with by the audience in the following way. They say that, and they're specifically saying this in this interview, that the older heroes were all heroes in a way that people could look at them and say, I want to be that hero. And yes, Stan Lee did express that exact notion. But they're saying, no, those are the old type of heroes. The new type of hero you interact with in a way where you look at that hero and say, that hero is me. This is the outcome of representation all over the place, by the way. But what is the difference? Because it seems subtle at first what the difference is between those two things. A person looking at a character and saying, I am that character, instead of looking at that character and saying, that character is me. Well, the difference is, if you know anything about early childhood development and have looked at any of the studies that try to analyze the different ways that boys and girls play, this is the difference between boy play and girl play. A boy will take his action figure, like G.I. Joe or He-Man or Spider-Man, and say, I am Spider-Man. A girl will take her Barbie doll and say, this Barbie doll is me. Now, I have much more to say on that topic, but I want to break off for 1 second and give you a personal anecdote that actually confirms some of this. And I know that anecdotes are not rational evidence, but I just wanted to share this with you. I can tell you right now that as a boy, this is exactly how I played. The first toy that I can really remember being excited to have was a 1.5 foot tall, maybe 2 foot tall plastic Spider-Man that actually shot webs. I can remember he was fighting all the time with my mecha Shogun warriors, who actually could shoot out discs from their arms as well. But after getting that toy, I annoyed everyone to no end for the next year at least by running around the house and making hand signs like I was shooting webs out of my web shooter and making the sound as if I was doing the same, because I was Spider-Man. And this was a mindset that continued on with me to a point where it almost literally killed me on more than one occasion. I'll give you the easiest to describe. Me and all the other boys in the neighborhood, we found this giant tree out in the middle of nowhere where basically no one could see us. It was really high, probably like 50 feet in the air. And we all decided that we were going to climb to the top of this tree and see how far we could see from the top of this tree. Now, I was pretty young, and I got about 2/3 of the way up this tree, so probably like 40 feet in the air, and I couldn't get any higher. So what did I decide to do? I decided that, hey, why do I need another branch to actually move myself up? I'm Spider-Man. I'll just jump from one branch to another. Let me tell you, that did not work out well for me. And when I finally got to the ground, I was literally inches from death. And I'm sure there's more than one guy listening to my voice who can remember putting on a cape like he was Superman, jumping off of something really high, and then hurting themselves severely. This is how boys play. And why? Well, because this is how boys interact with fictional characters. We say, I am this character. But the point of this new type of hero that these three directors of this movie describe is the feminine way that a person would interact with a fictional character. Therefore, the new way that you interact with these new heroes is through the female way. Once again, we see it is the female way, which is the progressive, new, future way to interact with these characters. It is the right way to do things. That old male way, that's the wrong way to do things. And this is quite specifically one of the central progressive talking points that they generated and implemented through feminism. Quite specifically, there are feminists now who quite publicly say that 40 years ago, they went and made up studies and data and then fed that false information to the justice system in the US so that the justice system would then see women as being always the victim and men as always the aggressor, and therefore women are saints and men are demons. And that's how the justice system for the last 40 years has proceeded, and it has seeped into every other part of culture as well. I've told this story many times, but about 10 years ago, I was in a school meeting for a grade school, and they were talking about how the boys were acting in much too an aggressive and competitive way when playing outside, and I said, well, boys will be boys, and quite literally, they wanted to eject me from the building. Why? Because, of course, the progressive point, the way to do things is to see the female way as correct and the male way as wrong. And on top of that, I just want to point out that we have this being laid onto a character who is named a hero in this specific way, who is what? He's a black male. This is what you've seen, again, within the comics for the last 10 years minimum, is the feminization of black males. And yes, I know he's part Latino as well, but that's how they present him. And this is the exact thing that I was talking about when I covered that interview with the Marvel creator who's writing a new black superhero for, I think, Silver Surfer, what's the name? Gaslight, something like that. But he specifically talks about these kinds of points. And my video was about the fact that, you see, the quote-unquote progressives are specifically using this part of the population, that is to say black males, as their weapon. That is to say, you indoctrinate them into following what you have to say, and then as long as you can rile them up and pull that trigger, you can use them as a political tool to tell your opponents who want more conservative ways to deal with things. You'll say to them, oh, if you do that, if you pass that law, there's going to be rioting. There's going to be a whole bunch of violence. There's going to be coverage on it. The news is going to be everywhere, and you're going to look bad. And this is how they apply political pressure, while at the same time have a control mechanism over this very specific part of the population by indoctrinating them into this feminist word mindset, whereby they can give them orders to advance or cease by using what to the rest of us is gobbledygook, and it is the feminist way of speaking, how they've redefined words like power and empowerment. Like right now, these directors are redefining what a hero is. And if you take all of that and you go backward into my other points that I talked about at the first of this video with the alphabet people and the blue, pink, and white emphasis of this character, who, by the way, if Gwen Stacy turns out to be an alphabet person of the T kind, and Miles Morales is attracted to her, guess what? That makes Miles Morales. But again, the point is, this new type of hero that they're selling is the female way to interpret things. What they're doing is purposefully sowing confusion between the male and the female. And no, I'm not going to say gender confusion, because the entire idea of applying gender to people is a feminist progressive idea. Gender is for words. Sex is for people. You're male or female. And this confusion of the two with this new type of hero is given the supporting evidence of that flag that's in the background of Gwen Stacy, that coloring which is in the background of Gwen Stacy's part of the story, etc., etc. But more important even than that is looking at this new type of hero and applying meta-modernism to it once again. Because what makes this new kind of hero, again, which Miles Morales is now the embodiment of, according to these directors, what makes him heroic? Well, it's not the heroism that normally people would talk about, that I always talk about, going back to virtue, being a paragon of virtue, doing these just and courageous things. No, that's not how he becomes a hero. He becomes a hero through social acceptance. Once again, pointing back to this is how females actually deal with things. They see much more value in social acceptance than males do, sometimes drawing their entire value from social acceptance. And this is how this new type of hero is a hero. They're heroic because society accepts them. And again, that's why you have all of this backdrop of these BLM stickers and the flag and the lighting and his mother talking in a way that's a progressive argument. All of this is because they're saying, you see, he's socially acceptable. Therefore, find meaning in this hero, which is part of metamodernism, because he is socially acceptable. This is now your meaning for this place and this time. And I'm sure there's probably more than one person listening to me still who are saying to themselves, well, I saw the movie and I liked it. And besides that, I thought Miles Morales actually was heroic in that old way of being heroic. Well, you can go ahead and think that all you want. But I can tell you right now that if you were to go onto any of the official websites or chat rooms that Marvel or Disney or any of these places run and talk about the character in the form that's meant to be talked about, that is to say, that they're putting up in this way, saying, no, it's not about all this progressivism, it's about being heroic in these old heroic ideals, things that I'm normally talking about, you will be told, either by the administrators of that forum that you're on, or by the other people that are on there, that guess what? If you cannot accept progressivism as being the central point of his heroism, this movie is simply not for you. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And again, if you want true heroic stories and true manly stories, click on those links in the description for my superhero graphic novels or for my upcoming fantasy graphic novel, CROM the Destroyer. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.